50,000 voices roaring in unison, and yet one child's cry cut through. In the middle of a stadium built for noise, everything stopped. For exactly 12 seconds, the world's loudest frontman chose silence. And the next words he spoke left even the strongest in tears. Wembley Stadium, London, July 1986. Though some sources differ on whether it was Munich or Leiden. Spotlights burning white across the night air, a humid mist rising above the crowd, and just beneath it, the unmistakable sound of a child's sob drifting against the wall of noise. The day had been building for hours. Long before the band appeared, chants rolled like waves across Wembley, people stamping their feet on concrete, singing fragments of Queen choruses as if rehearsing for the main event. When the lights finally snapped dark and the first chords thundered, the place shook. Freddie burst onto the stage with his trademark flourish, half microphone stand in hand, chest open to the night air, and the crowd erupted. Every note of One Vision, every stab of Brian May's guitar, cracked across 50,000 raised fists. The sheer volume rattled ribs. Dennis O'Regan's tour photographs, later published in the official '86 Wembley book, capture families near the barrier, children perched high on shoulders, their faces caught between awe and overwhelm. One of those faces, fans recall, was streaked with tears. A boy, perhaps 7 or 8, clutched his father's collar as if holding onto a lifeline. While the crowd surged in ecstasy, his tiny shoulders trembled. The contrast was jarring. A sea of adults roaring with abandon, and one child crying. Eyewitness diaries and even the grainy footage of crowd shots suggest Freddie saw him. His gaze swept the front rows, narrowed, then lingered. Something in his body language changed. For a man known to command without hesitation, there was suddenly a flicker of pause. The band played on, relentless, but Freddie's attention was elsewhere. You can almost see the calculation, the split second where performer and person collided. Have you ever felt a celebration suddenly turn into a prayer? That was the atmosphere. The momentum broke, the energy shifted, and then what seemed impossible happened. The drums hit their mark, the guitars were ready to surge forward. Yet the man, who never missed a beat, stopped. And in that hush, all eyes turned to Freddie. The break was abrupt. One moment thunder, the next a cliff edge. Roger Taylor's drumstick hovered mid-air. Brian May's hand still suspended above the strings. The wave of sound that had been roaring since dusk crashed into silence, leaving behind only confusion. People shouted at first, uncertain if there had been a technical failure. But then they noticed Freddie, gripping the mic stand, his posture still, his head tilted just enough to suggest he was searching beyond the glare of lights. It wasn't like him. Mercury thrived on filling space, throwing his voice across stadiums as if silence was the enemy. Melody Maker's review of that July 1986 concert even noted an unusual pause mid-set, uncharacteristic of Mercury. That line stands as one of the few printed receipts that something out of the ordinary really happened, and it wasn't the equipment. Fans closest to the stage remember catching the flicker in his expression. He wasn't looking at the monitors or his bandmates. He was looking out into the pit, towards something, or someone, most of the audience couldn't yet see. The hush deepened. In the absence of drums or guitar, the air itself felt thick. Later accounts describe people glancing around, trying to understand. Some thought it was an interlude. Others whispered, "What's wrong?" But then the realization spread, subtle at first. Freddie wasn't halting for himself. He was halting for someone else. Isn't it strange how the loudest moments often reveal who listens best? That night, amid 50,000 voices, it was a single child's sob that bent the show. Freddie didn't speak right away. That was the tension. He let the silence stretch, measuring it, testing the weight of the crowd's patience. It was only a handful of seconds, but to those in the stadium, it felt like a lifetime. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he raised his right hand. A single finger pointed skyward, and the stadium obeyed. The finger lifted, and for a heartbeat, the entire stadium froze. Then the stage lights tilted, searching, cutting across the front rows like a giant eye scanning the sea of faces. Security guards moved closer to the barrier, hands shading their eyes, following Freddie's line of sight. And there he was, a boy, no more than 7 or 8, perched on his father's shoulders, his face wet with tears. Tiny fists clutched at the man's collar, as if afraid of slipping into the ocean of bodies below. Some fans later recalled he had been shoved during the surge. Others believed the roar itself, multiplied by 50,000, was simply too much for a child to bear. Whatever the cause, his sobs had carried. Freddie's gaze locked on him. In O'Regan's photographs, you see Mercury's body language shifting. His stance no longer aimed at the masses, but at a single point in the crowd. It was a striking reversal. The world's most flamboyant showman, narrowing his entire performance onto one trembling child. People craned their necks, some climbing onto benches, others standing on tiptoe, trying to follow the invisible line that connected stage to boy. Eyewitness diaries later archived in the Queen Fan Club Quarterly described the uncanny hush. We all wanted to know what he was seeing. The energy in the stadium shifted again. Restlessness gave way to curiosity. Every fan who had come for spectacle suddenly became part of an intimate moment between 3 people. The boy, his father, and Freddie Mercury. Can a single pair of trembling hands outweigh 50,000 fists in the air? That night, the answer seemed to be yes. Freddie stepped closer to the edge of the stage, lowering his mic, the sequins on his outfit scattering fragments of light across the stands. He leaned forward, closer, closer still, until it seemed he might leap into the crowd. The cameras didn't catch the boy's face clearly, but every person in the front rows swore his sobs quieted, if only for a second. And then Freddie bent down, mic in hand, and finally spoke. No script guided this moment, no pre-planned banter or cheeky line from the setlist notes. Freddie Mercury, who could turn Wembley into a carnival with one flick of his wrist, suddenly spoke not as a frontman, but as a man addressing a frightened child. His voice dropped lower than anyone expected, softer than the booming tenor that had just rattled the stands. "It's all right, darling, we're with you." That line appears in multiple letters to the Queen Fan Club magazine in autumn 1986, though the exact phrasing is debated. Some recall a gentle kiss blown toward the child. Others swear he extended his arm as if to bridge the distance. Whether or not the cameras caught it, fans close to the stage testify to the tenderness. Imagine the whiplash, thousands of bodies still buzzing from "Tie Your Mother Down," suddenly hushed as if in a cathedral. People described hearing the shuffle of shoes on concrete, even the click of camera shutters. In place of a wall of sound, there was a collective whisper, as if everyone instinctively leaned into the quiet. The boy's sobs, according to eyewitnesses, faltered, his eyes wide and wet under the glaring spotlights, fixed on the man in sequins who, in that instant, looked less like a god of rock and more like a guardian. The exchange was wordless after that, a nod, perhaps a faint smile. Have you ever witnessed power bend into gentleness without losing its force? That was the paradox of Mercury in this moment. His authority didn't shrink when he hushed the stadium. It expanded, reshaped into compassion. Around him, 50,000 strangers learned to whisper together. No fists pumping, no chants echoing. Just stillness, suspended over the hum of amplifiers waiting to erupt again. And yet, even in that stillness, Freddie's instincts as a performer never faded. He let the tenderness linger just long enough, then turned back to the vast ocean of faces, mic raised once more. But Freddie wasn't done. He turned back to the crowd. It takes a conductor to silence an orchestra. That night, it took Freddie Mercury to silence a stadium. With one raised hand, steady, deliberate, he asked for quiet, and tens of thousands obeyed. For 12 long seconds, there was no chant, no scream, no drumbeat. Just awareness. A boy's tears had reshaped the rhythm of the night. Some fans later wrote that in those suspended seconds, they could hear the fluorescent buzz of the floodlights. Others swore a faint train whistle slipped in from beyond the walls of Wembley. A Guardian review published in July 1986 described it as a sudden and moving quietude, unlike anything in rock. That line, buried in a column otherwise praising the spectacle, remains one of the only journalistic traces of the pause. It wasn't absence, it was unity. Imagine 50,000 lungs drawing breath together, but refusing to exhale too loudly. The stillness carried its own weight. People who had queued all day for volume suddenly found themselves complicit in silence, bound together by the recognition of one small, fragile figure near the stage. When was the last time silence made you feel more alive than sound? For many, that was the paradox etched into memory that night. And then, because even silence has a limit, Freddie's face broke into a smile. He tilted his head, almost teasing, as if to say, "Shall we try again?" The hand dropped slowly, ready to summon the storm back. And then, with a smile, he shifted the energy again. The return didn't arrive with bombast. It arrived with a hum. Freddie leaned into the microphone, eyes glinting, and let out the softest "Ayo," the familiar call that usually thundered across arenas like a battle cry. But this time it came gentle, like a lullaby. For a moment the crowd hesitated. Then one by one voices answered. Not a roar, more of a murmur rising cautiously. It was as if 50,000 people had to relearn how to sing, beginning with a whisper. Slowly, layer by layer, the sound grew. The boy, still perched high on his father's shoulders, managed a faint smile. His tears hadn't dried completely, but the sobs had eased into quiet breathing. A bootleg recording from Wembley '86, around the 43-minute mark, captures this unusual dip in energy. You can hear Freddie's first "Ayo" delivered softer than usual, followed by a tentative response that swells back into strength. It's not theatre, it's comfort, caught on tape. The band sensed it instantly. Brian May leaned into a mellow chord progression. John Deacon's bass walked softly under the crowd's rising echo, and Roger Taylor held back the crash of cymbals until the swell demanded it. Queen, masters of spectacle, were in this moment masters of patience. Isn't it remarkable how a single voice can reteach thousands how to sing? That night, the audience discovered it firsthand. What had begun as noise turned to silence, and now, reborn, became harmony. The set rolled forward, but something in its texture had changed. Fans who later wrote about the concert insisted the songs after this moment carried a new warmth, as if the entire crowd had been retuned. Yet the story didn't end in the stadium. When the final notes faded and the fireworks lit the sky, the moment was already slipping into legend. It never made the official broadcast, never appeared on the polished Live Magic album. On paper, the setlist rolled forward without a hitch, but in the hearts of those who stood there, something unforgettable had taken place. Fans carried it like contraband. Letters poured into the Queen Fan Club magazine. The 1992 retrospective reprinted several of them, each one telling of the boy Freddie stopped for. Details varied. Some swore it happened at Wembley, others claimed Leiden or Munich. The words Freddie used shifted in recollection, but the essence never changed. A crying child, a pause, a stadium silenced. Bootleg tapes circulated in trading circles, whispered about in fan meetups, played at low volume in bedrooms where listeners tried to pinpoint the exact second when the energy cracked. Decades later, when forums bloomed online, the story resurfaced again and again. Arguments flared. Which night, what exact phrase, was it even real? But the persistence of the memory was proof of its truth. A crying boy became folklore, proof that even the gods of rock listened, proof that in the middle of grandiosity, fragility still mattered. And with every retelling, the myth expanded. How does a memory survive when the official record ignores it? Sometimes it survives because people refuse to let it fade. And for Freddie himself, those choices became part of his final legacy. Years later, the story gathered new resonance. Fans revisiting Queen's final tours understood what few had dared admit in 1986. Freddie's time was running short. Though not public, his illness had begun its quiet march. In that light, the pause for a crying child felt different. Not a break in the show, but a glimpse of the man beneath the crown. Mick Hibbert's 2001 retrospective in classic rock magazine called it Mercury's quietest moments, framing these pauses as rare windows into his humanity. For many, it wasn't about whether the boy was 7 or 8, or whether the city was London or Leiden. It was about the fact that Freddie, standing in the teeth of fame, still chose tenderness over spectacle. Every retelling deepened the meaning. Fans found themselves choked up, even decades later, when speaking of it, not because of the notes he hit, though they were unmatched, but because of the silence he kept. Because in the chaos of rock and roll, he had the audacity to stop and listen. Isn't legacy often written in the smallest gestures, not the loudest anthems? That night, a man known for strutting the stage in sequins and firelight proved that compassion could be just as electrifying. The boy's name may be lost, but the silence he inspired endures. In a career built on sound, Freddie Mercury's most unforgettable note may have been silence. A single child's tears, rising above the thunder of 50,000, reminded everyone that music is not only about noise, it is about listening. That night, compassion echoed louder than any chorus. Decades later, the story still travels, reshaped in memory, debated in detail, but unwavering in spirit. Freddie's voice reached millions, but his pause reached something deeper. The reminder that even in the grandest arenas, humanity can find a stage. This story endures because fans keep it alive. Now it's your turn. Share the moment when music made you feel truly seen. Drop it in the comments, and let's build an archive of small gestures that changed everything.